The purpose of story and storytelling helps shape who we are and who we might become. We all have a personal story, but on its own, our personal story needs to talk to other people's stories and the bigger story of life. So story, in a way, can act as a window and a mirror. It can open our eyes to see other things that we mightn't have imagined or thought of, but it can also reflect back on us how we operate within the world today ourselves. And it can tell us something about ourselves as well as about others. Sacred stories touch the deepest level of our being. They tap into something inside us that resonates with who we are and who we might want to become. Most sacred stories are old, but there are new sacred stories, but they might not have universal meaning. And I think that might be the distinction between sacred stories that belong to religious traditions, that they have developed over time and have been interpreted over time and show different meaning over time. But with new sacred stories, they might be more confined to family or culture rather than the broader religious tradition. A sacred story is one that is significant for a group of people because it talks about their relationship with their God and how they might operate in the world. So some sacred stories are historical. They tell us the story of how a people developed their relationship with their God. Other stories tell people about how society in the past has operated. And when we start to look at the past, we again see reflections of ourselves and our actions in the past, and we can then translate them in a way to a new time. Some sacred stories can be represented in a variety of media. So if we have a visual interpretation of a sacred story, we have a number of things happening there. Before everybody could read, they knew stories. Particularly in medieval Europe, the sacred stories of Christianity were told through both the visual arts and the performing arts. The windows in stained glass windows in cathedrals often represented the birth of Jesus through to his resurrection. When you brought your crops to town at Easter, often the passion, death and resurrection of Jesus was acted out in the marketplace. And so in many ways you didn't need to be able to read because what you heard and what you saw enabled you to engage with the sacred stories of Christianity. Many sacred stories are meant to be heard and proclaimed rather than read from the page of a book. The power of hearing the story is that the listener can take that story into their own life and they can imagine it in a variety of forms. The telling of stories over time has been important. And in the telling of the story, particularly in oral traditions, there is often a patterning to that story that helps the believer in that tradition to remember the story. So sacred stories are ways of interpreting life, but then some parts of sacred text may be a guideline of how we live our lives. We need stories to live by because they stretch our imagination. They enable us to see ourselves and other people in new ways. They may even provide us with insights into how we can live in this world built on the wisdom of those from the past.